I assume everyone is taking all of this in. There's pros to putting it all together, and then there's this as well. Goodness. We did it. Good morning. Hope everyone has had a good day so far. If you would go ahead and turn to Mark chapter 8. Mark 8 is where we are going to be picking up in just a moment. As I get there myself. We're going to be picking up in Mark 8, but before we do so, let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer. If you would please bow with me. Father in heaven, Lord, thank you for this opportunity we have to meet together as this family, as this body, with the mission of coming here to remember your Son and what he's done for us, and allowing that to move us to live different lives, being set apart people, holy and blameless, attempting to be as perfect as we can for you, because that's what you deserve out of us. Lord, be with us in this class. Be with all those who are going into classes this morning. Help us to have open hearts, ready to be moved by your words, and a decisive mind, being willing to put into action what we're learning so that we can continue to improve with every step of the day. Thank you for your Son and his sacrifice. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Well, I want to start by throwing myself under the bus. When you're teaching, there is a level of attention to every single word of every single class. And then when you're sometimes in the student role, maybe not as attentive. And so as I sat back there with a very happy baby on Wednesday, and Sterling kept making all these comments like, yep, I'm going to walk right into this one, and Jared's going to pick it up on Sunday. I won't talk too much about this. I know Jared's going to take this one. I'm like, yeah, can't wait for Jared to take this one. That's going to be a great point, whatever that might be. And then Jared and I switched. So now I'm here. And did I go back and re-listen to Wednesday's lesson on 2 times speed? Absolutely I did. Does Sterling sound very funny at 2 times speed? Absolutely he does. So if maybe you get bored listening to me talk, feel free to listen on live stream later at least 1.5, maybe 2. It will be far more entertaining, I promise. But we're going to pick up in Mark 8, and it is, to Sterling's point, it's a tough pickup. So we are going to go back to the beginning of the chapter just for our initial reading, because I think it sets the scene for everything we're going to talk about. So if you would, Mark 8, we're going to read starting in verse 1. It says, "In those days, when again a great crowd had gathered, and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said to them, 'I have compassion on the crowd, because they've been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they'll faint on the way, and some of them have come from afar.' And his disciples answered him, 'How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place?' And he asked them, 'How many loaves do you have?' And they said 7. He directed the crowd to sit down on the ground. He took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them, gave them to his disciples to set before the people, and they set them before the crowd. They had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha." Verse 11, "The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, 'Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation.' And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them. And he cautioned them, saying, 'Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod.' And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, 'Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets of broken pieces did you take up? They said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, do you not yet understand? Verse 22, and they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand, led him out of the village, and when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, do not even enter the village. So this is what we're going to talk about this morning. So picking up right after the feeding, the Pharisees essentially go and approach Jesus as he's trying to leave. And it says that they began, trying to test him. I'm not sure how many King James Version folks we have here. In King James and others, that word test is that word there, bolded in italics, that I will not attempt for embarrassing sake. But it is translated in some versions, King James included, I believe, as tempt. So they have come very much, and we talked about it, I think Jay made the point last time I was teaching, these men are coming with motive. So they're coming and they're approaching, and it says again, they began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. So when you read this kind of back and forth, what other stories maybe pop up in your head? This idea of someone essentially bringing the argument to God in this effort to test him, to tempt him, to put him to the test. What are some stories in the Bible that maybe pop up in your head? I've got one in the New Testament, one in the Old, but there are many, many others you could think of. I'm sorry? You think of Job? Absolutely. That one is about as clear as day in terms of how Job's faith is being tested. Who else can you think of, maybe? Yeah, the Israelites tested God plenty in their behavior and in the way they asked for many things, whether it's being led from Moses and onward. What else comes to mind? Jesus himself. That was the first one that popped in my mind just because of, I think, the recency to it. Maybe it didn't hit home in this class because Mark, in his very Mark way, decided that that's something we should kind of read in passing at the tail end of chapter 1 and just keep moving. Any in the Old Testament regarding a prophet?
Moses didn't think he could speak. I mean, God had plans for him.
Yeah, even him kind of putting God to the test in terms of what he can do. Elijah. That was the one that popped in my head. That was the Old Testament version, and I think the reason it popped in my head is because when I think of the motive behind the Pharisees' request, what were they essentially asking of him? What was the point, right?
They wanted him to prove who he was.
Right, they want him to prove who he was. And that is very interesting to me, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But they were trying to coax or provoke or whatever, something out of him to prove either their preconceived notions or see something that they wanted to see for whatever that reason was. And you see the same thing, right, with the devil and Jesus. This constant, if you are really this, do this, right? And so I love little tiny phrases that maybe we read right over. What was Jesus' physical response to this encounter? He sighed deeply, right? What do you think that was because of? Because I think there's a lot of fine answers here too. What is, yes sir?
One of the things I forgot to mention on Wednesday night is I think whether that's what he did, but Mark's timed this to the man that Jesus just healed. So there was a man that couldn't hear and couldn't see, and these people won't hear and they won't see. And so I think the wording there is very intentional to connect the two. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, Sterling's point is maybe this is connecting to the miracle and the person who just has had their eyes open and their ears open and is now, able to have this clarity that we're not seeing here. I have a real bad problem with not getting through. So as much as I want to keep getting your thoughts here, for me, it's just this exasperation, maybe, this just defeated nature of why, right? And this goes to my second question. What does this request say about how the Pharisees have viewed everything else up to this point? Right? Because they've been there. They've seen it. If this is what they're asking right now, what does it imply about everything else up to this point? Not good enough. How embarrassing would that be? To be in that position, to be looking directly at him and saying, I know we've seen, fill in the blanks. We need more. And my question to you all is why? Why do they need more?
Because they're looking for a reason to deny him.
Looking for a reason to deny him?
Nothing was ever going to be enough.
Nothing was ever going to be enough. I heard one more voice in the back. Yes, ma'am.
And I think they really don't want him. This is Jesus' case of getting stronger and stronger because of what he's doing. And they do not want that conclusion that he is who he says he is, because that's going to be so much of a shift in everything. I mean, that's how I'm seeing this. They're going to keep questioning.
No, I think that's a really good point. This idea that they're not, he is gaining steam. The momentum is growing. And let's cut out the whole grand plan thing. If Jesus heard this question and he wanted to prove to them without a shadow of a doubt that he was God incarnate, could he have done so? Could he have done something to leave no question at all about what he is in control of? Absolutely. We sing a song about 10,000 angels. We've seen so many different things he's done that he could have done once again. They are almost trying to force him to leave the path he's supposed to be on. He has a plan. What is the common phrase that he keeps saying to all these people who he's healed in one way or another? Tell no one. Don't even go back to your village. And we've talked about the why behind it, and we even talked about it when it came to why the demons shouldn't be the one doing the proclaiming. He has a plan. There is a path he is on. There is a timeline that needs to be followed, and it's not the time yet. And when we get to the end of class today, we're about to see a bit of a shift in that timeline. But right now, the Pharisees, I think you're right. There's nothing that was going to get the point across, because they didn't want to get the point. And it goes back to the whole issue of blaspheming the Spirit. And I think Mr. Underwood made such a good point in that class. When you're invalidating the source of who God is, you are invalidating God. And that's it. And so these men are coming here seeking this fight, wanting an outcome and a response that they're just not going to get. And so this is the reply in 12. Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly, I say to you, no sign will be given of this generation. What was the purpose of Jesus' signs? You can hop in the entire book of John if you want to make it incredibly clear. What was the point of the signs? So that you may believe. What was to come from it? Belief, what's another word that kind of fits in there too? Faith, right? The goal was for a heart that was willing to make a change to encourage that change, to whatever that might have been, to whatever degree that might have been. So for me, going back to the Pharisees here, his signs were not to convince hardened unbelievers of something. If that was the case, I go back to the thing I said 5 seconds ago. If he wanted to put on a show to leave no questions unanswered, he sure could have. And if they wanted, if God wanted to do that right now today in the United States in 2024, I promise you he could. But there is a beauty in the relationship that God has with his creation, that there is free will, and there is a decision to be made on our part to enter into the covenant and to become a part of that relationship with him. He's not going to force our hand. And the fact that he has done what he has done up to this point, I think shows a whole lot of love about a very confused generation that he's a part of. So here, this was something that it kind of derailed my own reading. As I put this point on, it said, I just put it this way, I said, it was often to show the power of God within the context of faith, mercy, and compassion. Those were the three words I thought of. And as I tried to figure out why those were the three words that immediately popped in my mind, I thought of every single class we've sat through out here. These right here, we're not going to go through every one. I went back and reread up until this point, and I tried not to, skew the words just to make my point look better. So we threw some out. But this right here is a list of miracles just up to this point in this class that Jesus has performed for someone, and the reason behind it is either faith, mercy, or compassion in one way or another. It says he was moved with pity with the leper in chapter 1, with the paralytic in chapter 2 being lowered. It was when they saw their faith. And then Legion, not cool, that's a horrible way to word that. The demon who was just like super demon, I guess, best way to go about that one. You don't see in the beginning Jesus looking out and seeing him rushing and him having compassion. But at the tail end of that, once he has been healed, he comes to Jesus and begs of him, let me come with you. I think one of the best examples of how a truly moved person who has come face to face with the glory of God and the power of God acts. And what does Jesus say to him? Basically, go back and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you. The woman who had the bleeding problems, kind of in the middle of the story of Jairus' daughter, her faith has made her well. With Jairus, he had this reassuring compassion when he gets the report that the daughter has died, and he said, do not fear, only believe. And then just a couple chapters ago, the 5,000, he had compassion for the daughter in chapter 7, for this statement of faith, essentially. And then the 4,000 that we just read, he once again had compassion. So it's easy to build this timeline just within the book that says, what is it that usually leads to Jesus putting his power on display? And it's not to prove a point. It's not to backhand someone who needs something knocked in their brain. It is because he loves his people, his creation, and because he is like us, he has compassion and love, and he wants faith to grow. And so for me, the Pharisees asking such a thing, being the spiritual leaders, must have just been exhausting. And think of how many times just up to this point, they have come from Jerusalem to talk to him. The scribes have come to talk to him, testing him, questioning him, putting him to the test, judging him secretly. That's just a human aspect, I think, of our Savior, is that he got tired. We talked about it this morning from Jarrett's perspective. He got thirsty. He got tired. And man, it must be exhausting to be questioned by the people you're coming to save. Yes, sir.
They weren't sincere. That's obvious in the fact that Mark says they came to test him. They weren't sincere at all. They wanted to undo him, take him out of the position he'd already established. And those who had good hearts believed. Those who didn't, that's like the Pharisees were.
Well, let's talk about them a little bit more, shall we? No, Jay make a great point. The idea of, the lack of sincerity and the motive behind it, that is what elicits a certain reaction. So let's keep reading there, going to 14. Excuse me. Jared didn't teach because he's going to cough in the mic, and now I'm going to do the same thing. Sorry, guys. Verse 14. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they only had one loaf with them in the boat. Now, I don't know what happened to the baskets of bread. Don't ask me. Maybe they sent them on with all the people making their long journeys. But it seems that we have once again found a problem when it comes to the disciples and their food. So I think Jay might have made the point last class, actually. Whenever Jesus teaches a spiritual message, oftentimes he ties it into a physical thing that's either present or common or even times of the year, right? So now we have this problem. And I don't know how your versions read. Some of them, the wording's interesting, and I tried to do the whole Greek thing to figure out. But essentially it's to say Jesus knew that this was a problem, and so because he knew this was happening, he makes this comment, and their follow-up is almost like, oh, it's weird that he's talking about this because we do need bread. It's very much one of those, I know what's on their mind, I'm going to make a point to kind of bring these points home. So again, knowing that there's only one loaf, he cautioned them saying, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Some versions may say the Herodians there. And then they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread, because that is how they're operating at the current moment. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. If you were to come up to me in my normal life and make any comment about being aware of leaven, if I didn't have my spiritual cap on, I would be like, that's a very odd thing for you to say to me, because I don't make bread, nor do I know hardly anything about a lot of stuff. But this obviously made sense. Goodness, Jared. I know you have absolutely no actual reason to blame for this, but I'm going to blame you for this the whole time. So the idea of the leaven here. What does leaven do for my bread makers and good Bible nerds out there? Okay, makes it rise. So we've got the scientific rising agent of it. I think that's one very big part of leaven. And what's the other really big part of leaven that gets discussed? It permeates and expands, absolutely. A little bit of it put into a bigger amount essentially takes over. It is this idea that a presence of a little can change a lot. So this is, I think these are two things that they would know, I would assume. So this is what Jesus starts this with, which I think is just very funny to me. What an odd conversation opener, right? As they argue over their bread. And the groups that are discussed here, I want to ask you about them. We have the Pharisees and Herod, or the Herodians. I think we can make the same point either way. You're so sweet. You're the best. You're the best. What do we know about these two groups? Just on the surface. We don't have to compare them right now. What do we know about these two groups? Pharisees we've talked a lot about, so we'll give them a pass. Herod, Herodians, whether we stick in Mark or go elsewhere, what do we know about them? I've never been so happy for you guys to not talk for a second. All right, what do we know about them or him?
Their negative attitude just permeated everybody.
So a negative attitude permeated everyone. And even at the most basic level, what type of people, heritage-wise, like whatever, where did these people come from? Who are the Herodians? I'm sorry? Oh, going way back. Yeah, so, and in terms of Mark, what have we seen Herod do up to this point?
He's like the puppet king that the Romans are ready.
Kind of the puppet king. And what did, is it chapter 6 maybe? I don't remember. What did Herod do already in the book of Mark? So we can at least assume the readers of this book have seen him already. What was he responsible for? Yeah, John the Baptist's death, because of him, because of this wife problem, very Ahab, Jezebel adjacent here. And the people that are under him, whether we're talking about, his kingdom, his people, his followers, they very much did not get what was happening. And so for me, when I'm thinking, okay, I get why he would bring the Pharisees into this right now. Within the context, makes a lot of sense. But we're bringing in another group. What do these two groups or two people have in common, other than they're bad? Because I think that's a simple answer. I'm looking for more. How did these people think? Yes, sir.
Have this overriding willing desire to reject Christ.
Yeah, this absolutely overt rejection of Christ. And where did that come from? We're going to even go a layer deeper here. Why did they reject Christ? Because they both rejected him, I think, for different reasons on the surface, but at the core, it's very similar.
He was a threat.
He was a threat. What else?
They didn't want him to have power.
They didn't want him to have power. We're still on the kind of the political power aspect of it. What? I'm sorry?
They were afraid of what the people were going to do because they were powerful.
So they're afraid of kind of the political power. Yeah, let's dig another layer deeper. So clearly they didn't like what he said. They were worried about it.
It challenged them to change their lives, change their mind, and they were not going to do that.
Yeah. Jay said, essentially they challenged them to change their mind. And for me, if I'm trying to just one sentence this thing, both of these groups had very different conclusions on what the kingdom really was. And I think you can see that on both sides with different conclusions, but very similar thoughts. So for the Pharisees, if you're looking at what the kingdom of God through the Messiah was supposed to be, they have come to a conclusion that is very different than the kingdom that Jesus is presenting to them. We've already seen it with the parables, trying to reframe their minds to understand the upside down nature of the kingdom that we've talked about. So theirs, I think, much more goes down to heritage, spirituality, maybe even the political power of the government, I don't know. But that is what they thought was coming. And then if you go with the Herodians or Herod themselves, I think it's clear on the government side, on the what is being established, and that ties in everything you all said, right? The power, the followers. This guy is building a kingdom. What a terrifying thought for a worldly leader to hear that there's this powerful kingdom rising up because of this man. So both of these folks have an incorrect understanding of what this kingdom truly is. And so Jesus is telling his disciples, beware of the leaven. And then the disciples hear this and they're like, yep, we do not have bread still. That is correct. And so we're about to have, I think, one of the biggest, come to Jesus is a very funny word here, just come to Jesus moments, if you will, going into this conversation, leading into the midpoint and end of chapter 8. Because verse 17, I talked about it in chapter 7 about how stern Jesus was with the Pharisees when it came to the oral tradition and the oral law, this idea that there must have been some oomph behind the message due to how important it was. We now see a very similar thing happen, where he says to his disciples, mind you, do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? And for me, because we're going to talk about this a little bit more, it's hard for me to read this and not think that it was possible that maybe the disciples could have done a bit more. And that is an Ethan opinion. We have examples before of Jesus teaching things to the masses, including his disciples, and talking about the mystery that comes with it, right? This idea that not all have seen, for they may turn and repent, whatever, right? But with the disciples, that hasn't been the case. There is this understanding from Jesus' side that they are not getting it yet, but they're on the path. There's a progression to be made. But this to me just says maybe they weren't all in. The idea that he is asking them this after repeatedly just being maybe disappointed with their response. And Sterling, I think, nailed this. What did they just witness before getting on this boat? Feeding of the 4,000. And what was their response when they realized they didn't have enough food for the 4,000? What are we going to do? We're in the middle of nowhere. How are we supposed to get this food? And what had happened, I don't know the timeline, but just a couple chapters before, yeah, the 5,000 needed food. And what happened then? What are we going to do? I try to be empathetic because I know that if I were there seeing this stuff, unfortunately, I can't certainly say I would have gotten, because they don't, right? But for me, the ones who are following him like an apprentice, who have witnessed the feeding of the 5,000, fast forward, and then when the 4,000 are hungry, have this same response, I imagine Jesus is sighing deeply once again. So he is coming to them and kind of putting them to task and saying, is this you? Have you hardened your heart? Why are you not getting it? And this phrase in 18, having eyes do you not see and having ears do you not hear, this was not just some phrase that he said to them. Why would this sound familiar, at least within the book of Mark? We'll start there, to this group. In chapter 4 would be where you're looking if you need a reminder. When he used this phrase before, was he talking about the disciples? Who is he talking about in chapter 4? Chapter 4 and verse 12. 4 and 12, it said, to you, he's talking here to the 12 after they've asked about the parables. It says, to you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God, but for those outside, everything is in parables, so that they may indeed see but not perceive, and may indeed hear but not understand, lest they should turn and be forgiven. So this exact phrase is used to say, hey, not you, but those outside. And now he's turning that exact same phrase on them. And if they have any decent memory, which based on the 5,000, 4,000, maybe they don't, they say, oh, I've heard this before. And if they're good Bible students, they also can think of many places in the Old Testament that this exact phrase has been used. Whether it's in Jeremiah when he's describing foolish and senseless people, or in Ezekiel when he's talking about a rebellious house, or in Isaiah, these people are described as having dull hearts, heavy ears, and blind eyes. So this is now being turned on them. And he concludes it with this, I think, earnest question for them. Do you not remember? Do you not yet understand? What's the problem from our perspective? Oh, don't read that yet. What's the problem? Why should they have known better? Well, I don't think they understand, but why should they have understood?
Are they looking for an earthly king?
Maybe.
That was
I don't think, opinion time. I don't think they'd still be doing what they're doing if that was the only reason. I think there had to be more than just, we're only thinking earthly here. Because there's bits and pieces, and we're going to get to the end of 8, and I think we'll see that. But, yes, ma'am.
He's just repeated a miracle. I mean, he fed 5, he fed 4, it's a repeat, and he was able to do it.
Yeah. The point being, just seeing this repeated miracle, seeing him take care of people over and over, up until this point, has there been anything Jesus has said to them that has not come true? Whether it was sending them out to perform miracles themselves and cast out demons, whatever it may be, has there been anything up to this point where they should have any ounce of doubt in who he is and what he says? None. So for me, when I look at them, I'm saying the reason he's frustrated is because their faith, their understanding should be built on what Jesus has already done for them. How is that not connecting? And then you look at Moses and you look at the people going through the wilderness and you go through literally every part in the Old Testament and you can ask that same question. Why on earth are they not remaining faithful? And then I look at myself and I ask myself, has there been anything Jesus has ever said that has not come to pass? Why do I not have that faithfulness? And it then maybe makes sense why they're struggling. Yes, ma'am.
I want to mention something that Sterling mentioned on Wednesday night, and that was, he said, while Jesus was here in the incarnation, and it placed a real physical limit on himself, you know, so that, to think about God having limits, is badly like a spell. His mission, you know, his mission is winding down now. He may have limited amount of matter that he came to earth with, and then it's dissipated. So he's, you know, it's getting time for them to understand.
Yeah,
There comes a time where it's time for our children to grow up.
yeah, I think the end of your point is spot on. We're getting to a point where they need to get it. And we're going to see that momentarily. And just my little aside, I would pay so much money to hear the tone in which he said this. I don't know if it was angry. I didn't know if it's a passionate plea. I don't know if he's frustrated. But boy, would it be great to be able to hear how he's delivering something like this when it comes to the reading. Because this couldn't have been an easy exchange for him, because at the heart of it all is love. And I want to make sure we don't forget that. He loved them. And his desire was for them to get it. We're in our last couple minutes, so we're going to... I'm not good at this. So we go to a very cool miracle coming right off the heels of this example of the disciples not quite getting it. And we've already read it, but this man is brought to him who is blind. And it's a very interesting miracle because something really unique happens. And what is that? What makes this miracle so different? Yeah, it's partial, it's in steps, didn't see immediately. Now, your softball for the day. Did Jesus need to try twice to get this point across? Yes, sir.
If they would believe and if they heard, it required them to do something. And that's a big stumbling block.
For the disciples as a whole? Yeah. I guess the consequence of their faith would have made their next step significantly different, for sure. So, again, going back to this miracle here, so it's in 2 steps. Could Jesus have done it in 1? Yes, he can do whatever he wants. But he does it in 2. So he lays his hands on him the first time, and the man opens his eyes, and he sees people like trees. And then he does it again, and his sight was restored. Why this miracle? Why this way, and why now? And we already kind of touched on it.
He doesn't go part of the way. He finishes the job always, completely.
And who's the audience that I think this is really speaking to? Yeah. Going to your point, Jay, about he's going to the end, right? There's no part way. He's talking to the disciples who have not quite made it their whole way. And whether they view this as an eye-opener, pun intended, or some sort of idea that we can still get there. There is more to be done and we can still get there. We are going to be jumping into a really, really big part of this book. Depends on how you split it up. I think Jesus' ministry is really kind of split into 3 parts here in Mark, and this is the tail end of the first. To Mary's point about the timing of things, the heat's going to pick up a little bit, and the level of understanding is going to have to improve with it. So thank you all so much for all your participation and comments. On Wednesday, we are going to slow down for a bit with the next 6 or 7 verses and talk about carrying your cross. So we'd love for you to be there. Thanks.